this point, Mr. Kerry, recognize you for a 5-minute opening statement, and we'll go right down the line. Be sure and turn your microphone on.
There it is. Chairman Whitfield, Ranking Member Rush, and members of the committee, good afternoon. I want to thank you for today for inviting me for the opportunity to testify. My name is Mike Kerry. I'm president of the Ohio Coal Association. We are a trade organization that employs roughly 3,000 Americans in our Ohio coal mines. And according to many independent studies, that number goes up to roughly 30,000 secondary jobs in the coal fields. It is difficult for me to confine my remarks today on only the greenhouse gas regulations, because our industry nationwide is facing an unprecedented onslaught of new rules that will eliminate coal and the direct and indirect jobs associated with it. To be clear, we are not advocating for a rollback or repeal of the current existing Clean Air Act programs. But what is coming out of the Obama EPA is a host of new regulatory proposals, including the Clean Air Transport Rule and the Utility MAC. Already, because of threats from the administration and the EPA, United States power-producing companies have announced that they have plans to retire close to 14,000 megawatts of coal-fired electric generation by 2011 through 2020. To be clear, CO2 does not have a negative health impact. In fact, a repeal is not a rollback of the Clean Air Act. Congress did not intend for it to be regulated in 1990 and has not passed cap-and-trade legislation. It is also important to remember what EPA Director Lisa Jackson said just 2 years ago when she was asked what unilateral U.S. action on climate change would do. She said, and I quote, "It would have no significant impact on atmospheric greenhouse gas levels," end of quote. But the manufacturing jobs in my home state of Ohio and those of the surrounding states of West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Kentucky, and Michigan would ultimately see jobs go to China and India for no environmental benefit. In 2008, President Obama said, and I quote again, "If someone wants to build a new coal-fired power plant, they can, but it will bankrupt them because they will be charged a huge sum for all the greenhouse gas that they are being emitting." The President could have been clearer with his intentions, and his administration is following forward on their war on the American coal industry. This legislation that we are discussing today recognizes the logical starting point, and that is that Congress never intended greenhouse gases to be regulated under the Clean Air Act. It is my hope that this committee will take action on all legislation that will interpret this flood of regulations that are an overt attack on our industry. Not only just our industry, but the low-cost power-producing facilities that consume our product and ultimately the American manufacturing base. We are already seeing some of the effects of the Obama EPA's plan to regulate greenhouse gases. Domestic energy resource companies that had plans to grow job-creating economic development projects simply have mothballed them. And in many ways, companies cannot get access to the critical capital from the lenders because of the uncertainty. As this committee contemplates the regulating the specifics of greenhouse gas over a certain period of time, like a 2-year time period, should not be a viable solution. I think those of us who have worked with bureaucracies to try to obtain permits over the years, or even a direct answer, know that a 2-year delay of greenhouse gas regulations is nothing more than a political ploy, and no one in this industry is fooled by that tactic. Why are these EPA regulations such a problem? First, through the courts, EPA has been given an unchecked, arbitrary authority over jobs through the Clean Air Act permitting. These actions are unaccountable to anybody, including Congress. The mere existence of the flawed illegal tailoring rule concept shows that the EPA is redefining on their own, outside of congressional authority, who they believe should get special consideration, much like the political waivers under the health care law. Under present circumstances, the EPA can purposely err in granting a permit, thereby allowing activists to object and sue in court. Already, we are seeing groups such as the Center for Biological Diversity challenging dozens of projects across this country on the grounds of climate under NEPA. What is ultimately needed is an independent review. I believe that we need legislation that mandates that the House and the Senate review and approve all significant rules or regulations that are promulgated by the executive branch. We have this in the state of Ohio, and we have had it for many years. The question really comes down to whether Congress wants the EPA to unilaterally decide where economic development will occur, in which industry, and how much Americans will pay for their energy. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I stand ready to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
How do you draw this line? Mr. Carey, you said in your testimony that EPA has indicated that they would be closing down 14,000 megawatts of coal plants by 2011, 2012. Now, all of you are businessmen, but how, if you lose that kind of electricity, how do you make it up at a cost that does not increase the cost of American businesses? Can you answer that for me, Mr. Carey?
Mr. Chairman, I should be clear that the studies that I'm citing, there are several studies, and they all vary from about 75 gigawatts that would be lost under these proposals all the way down to 60 gigawatts. So that
gigawatts, okay.
Yeah, which also is 1,000 megawatts. So
yeah,
that's where we get the number from. But clearly, for our industry, when you are shutting down coal-based power-producing facilities, much like with the Clean Air Act, the rush was to put on clean coal technology, which at that time is scrubbers. What we're looking at now is the baseline of CO2 and the concept of carbon sequestration. So the ability for many of these power-producing facilities to actually meet the standard under a carbon sequestration standard and also ultimately be able to get the carbon dioxide to the facility, the technology, A, is not out, and ultimately what could happen and who is responsible for the carbon dioxide that goes into the ground.
Yeah.
So those numbers would reflect a tremendous drop in coal production. Yeah. And when you drop the amount of coals, as I stated before, Penn State said for every one coal job, up to 10 supporting jobs, the secondary jobs are due to that one coal job. You're looking at taking a number from anywhere of shutting down 77